I don't think you realize how crazy Saudi Arabia's propaganda room is. 40% of all tweets from the Arab world come from Saudi Arabia, much of which comes from this single room. Using this online army, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, is able to push whatever story he wants to the absolute top. Hashtag Vision 2030, trending. Hashtag Riyadh Rising, trending. Hashtag MBS Rocks, trending. Not only does this room push certain narratives to the top, but it also pushes opposing narratives to the bottom. If you have any sort of relevance within the Arab world and you post something that's not in the Saudi family's best interest, well then, the army is gonna flood your post with the negative comments and dislikes. We may even see these trolls under this video. At first, Twitter tried to take down this army by deleting thousands of their fake accounts. At one point, they had even deleted as many as 88,000 accounts, but eventually even Twitter gave up. The problem is that these tweets aren't coming from bots. We're talking about hundreds of real people working full-time on this effort, making it extremely difficult to discern between. And ever since Elon bought Twitter, all hopes of this army being taken down have been completely crushed. You see, Elon didn't buy out Twitter single-handedly. He had several investors pitch in, and his biggest investor was none other than Saudi Prince Al Walid. With no one else willing to fight against this propaganda, the Saudi people have taken this matter into their own hands through a movement called the B Movement. The idea is pretty simple. Just do the exact same thing that Saudi Arabia is doing, but with the might of the Saudi population. Surely, a few hundred trolls have no chance against a country of millions, right? Well, in theory, yes, but Saudi Arabia isn't exactly putting up a fair fight. The founder of the movement, Jamal Khashoggi, has literally been assassinated, and the country has been arresting leaders of the B movement left and right. So join me as we explore Saudi Arabia's quest to extend their dictatorship into the online world. Taking a look back, the online space in Saudi Arabia wasn't always so animated. In fact, the Saudi people didn't even get internet till 1999 because the kingdom was concerned about exactly this: online protests, the spread of dissenting ideas, and a more powerful societal voice. But by 2000, the internet was getting so big that continuing to ignore it would simply leave the country behind. So Saudi Arabia would go ahead and implement a very limited version of the internet. Saudi internet was to be regulated by the King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, or KACST. KACST was responsible for monitoring all internet traffic coming into the country and ensuring that Saudi values and beliefs were protected. To be honest, it's not clear how effective this organization was in actually regulating internet traffic. But its mere existence itself was enough to deter people from doing anything sus. After all, you didn't want to see what was on the other side of being caught. So people primarily just used the internet for research and educational purposes, as opposed to social media or entertainment. This made the kingdom rather closed off, even though they were technically connected to the internet. But that wasn't a problem. In fact, that's exactly what the kingdom wanted. They didn't care about Western perception or influencing the global narrative. As long as the oil business was booming and they had the Saudi people in line, that's all they cared about. But all of this would change on January 4th, 2010. This day marked a monumental day for their neighbors, the UAE, as this was the grand opening of the Burj Khalifa. At first glance, it was just another vanity tower, but Dubai had grand plans for this building. Dubai was going to use this pointy structure to gain worldwide relevance through social media, travel, airlines, and even movies. I mean, who could forget that famous scene where Tom Cruise kills the side of the Burj Khalifa in Mission Impossible? This was by no means Dubai's first PR stunt. They had been trying to shape global perception for decades, but the reality was that Dubai was a broke bum. They were one of the only Middle Eastern cities that didn't have oil, so they were trying to build a tourist hub, which wasn't working out all that great. In fact, they literally went bankrupt trying to build the Burj Khalifa, and Abu Dhabi had to bail them out. But fortunately for Dubai, the Burj Khalifa garnered more attention than they could have ever dreamed of. Suddenly, everyone knew about the Palm Islands, the Burj Al Arab, Atlantis the Palm, the lavish malls, the Lamborghini Police, and of course, Emirates and their A380s. Almost overnight, Dubai's outlandish dreams of becoming a tourist paradise became a reality. And all of their fake fortunes became real fortunes. Saudi Arabia didn't really care about Dubai's fortunes, as Dubai's wealth was still peanuts in comparison to Saudi wealth. But what did catch Saudi's attention was Dubai's oil independence. Less than 1% of Dubai's GDP was coming from oil. Meanwhile, nearly half of Saudi Arabia's GDP was coming from oil. Clearly, it was time for something to change. While all of this was unfolding, MBS was barely 24 years old, but he already had the ears of the country's most powerful leaders. He held several roles as a special advisor and a personal aide, and to him, the future of Saudi Arabia was clear. He had to free Saudi Arabia from oil. He was going to westernize the country, let in tourists for the first time, and revolutionize Western perception. But before he did all that, he would be met with a harsh reminder of just what he was up against. Between 2010 and 2012, the Middle East would be rocked by a series of uprisings called the Arab Spring. Essentially, a bunch of authoritarian Middle Eastern countries would see massive protests regarding human rights violations, corruption, and wealth inequality. The protests started in Tunisia, but they would quickly spread to Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain. And do you know what was central to all of this? The internet. The usage of social media doubled amongst these countries throughout the Arab Spring. Social media was how activists were able to communicate, organize, and retaliate. In fact, 9 out of 10 Egyptians and Tunisians admitted that they were using Facebook to organize protests and spread awareness. The scariest part for these dictators was that all of this was actually working. In early 2011, Tunisia's president of 23 years, Ben Ali, would run away to Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, in Yemen, the president would nearly be assassinated before he too would run away to Saudi Arabia and cede power. This quickly became a trend as the leaders of Egypt and Libya would also end up resigning. The Middle East was in turmoil, and many of its leaders were turning to Saudi Arabia for help. And Saudi Arabia would indeed step in. In March of 2011, Saudi Arabia and the UAE would send forces to Bahrain to occupy the country and silence the protests. But the UAE and Saudi Arabia weren't able to be the saviors for long, as protests started erupting in their own countries. These guys didn't mess around though. They had already seen several of their peers get overthrown by similar uprisings, so they would put their foot down almost immediately. The UAE would go out and arrest 94 of the most influential journalists, lawyers, teachers, and student activists and throw them in a secret prison. Some of these individuals are still in prison to this day. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's military would squash protests using brute force. Things were looking worse than ever. Throughout much of the Middle East, infrastructure had been demolished, supply chains had been disrupted, inflation was out of control, and poverty was reaching record highs. And in the end, it was these internal forces that would finally put an end to the Arab Spring. As it became harder and harder to just get by, people slowly lost the ability to fight, even if they still had the will to fight. And pretty soon, the Arab Spring would turn into the Arab Winter. Saudi Arabia had come out victorious, but MBS had seen firsthand just how dangerous the internet could be to authoritative regimes. And let's just say, MBS kept this in mind when he became the crown prince in 2017. MBS was set on westernizing the country. He had this massive plan called Vision 2030 that was supposed to free Saudi Arabia of its oil dependence. And honestly, it's actually a pretty fine plan. He was going to invest their oil wealth into health, education, infrastructure, recreation, and tourism. But this of course came with a caveat. He wanted to revolutionize Saudi Arabia without ceding power. And to make sure that he didn't lose control, he was going to build up an online army to enforce his rule. But before he could do all this, he had to first raise money. Vision 2030 entailed spending hundreds of billions every single year, so he needed some pretty deep pockets. And who better to get this from than Saudi's own elite? In late 2017, MBS would round up the country's 400 most powerful people in a Ritz-Carlton hotel, and he would turn the hotel into a jail. He basically told the elite that they could leave as soon as they admitted that they were quote-unquote corrupt and paid up. Were these people actually corrupt? Probably. Did MBS actually care about their corruption though? Probably not. This was simply a masterful way to not only raise money, but show the kingdom who was really in control. And let's just say, he raised a lot of money, over $100 billion to be precise. This means that MBS milked a cool $250 million from each person. Not a bad day's work, but that was just phase 1. Phase 2 of his fundraising effort consisted of taking their national oil company, Saudi Aramco, public in the world's largest IPO with a valuation of $2 trillion. By this point, MBS had the country's wealth and leaders under control. The next step was keeping the country's people in line despite the new freedoms. Enter the Twitter army. As we touched on in the intro, MBS would straight up create an entire Twitter battle station with the sole intent of promoting his agenda across social media. And given how much manpower he's dedicated to this effort, it's not surprising that it was quite effective. Everything that was trending on Arab Twitter was exactly what MBS wanted to trend. Number 1, Vision 2030. Number 2, Riyadh Rising. Number 3, MBS Rocks. Number 6, Vision 2030. Number 7, Crown Prince. Shout out to the Ace family. They were literally able to outperform state-sponsored propaganda. Anyway, the Saudi people would start referring to this state army as the Flies, and from that we would see a new movement pop up called the Bees. The Bees would do the exact same thing as the Flies, but instead of pushing state-sponsored propaganda, the Bees would push for social awareness and political reform. The first viral hashtag from the Bees was, "What do you know about the Bees?" initially posted by the movement's founder, Jamal Khashoggi. But just a few weeks after this post went viral, Jamal Khashoggi would be assassinated. The Saudis probably thought that this would finally put an end to this movement, but it simply made it far stronger as it garnered international attention and sympathy. This did lead to Saudi Arabia backing down for a little as they laid low avoiding the spotlight. But there's still a long road ahead as, in the end, the Saudi people are directly fighting against a state-sponsored propaganda machine backed by one of the wealthiest countries on earth. All that wealth may not last for long though. In fact, there's insider evidence that Saudi Arabia may very well be lying about their oil reserves. If you want to learn more, check out this video. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.